At the reading of the will, the millionaire CEO, Marcosu, could hardly contain his triumph. Finally, the company is mine, he thought. He laughed loudly when he saw his father's faithful cleaning lady, Donna Elsa, sitting in the corner as if she had a right to something. The lawyer began reading. Everything was going well until the last clause arrived. Marcos's smile disappeared. He looked at the cleaner, and his hands started to tremble. The main boardroom of Sterling Holdings, a sanctuary of glass and steel in the heart of Manhattan, was thick with a silent tension. The air conditioning whispered, a cold sound that contrasted with the frayed nerves of the directors in their impeccably tailored suits, lined up along the immense mahogany table. At its head, Marcus Sterling sat like a king on his throne, his body exuding the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. At 35, he was the personification of success, a man forged in wealth and shaped by the certainty that the world belonged to him. Today, that certainty would be made official. It was the reading of the will of his father, the legendary George Sterling, the architect of their monumental fortune. Marcus adjusted his silk tie, a smug smirk playing at the corner of his lips. He glanced at the lawyer, a gray-haired man with a restrained expression. "Let's get this over with, Mr. Matthews," he said, his voice ringing with impatience. It was then that his gaze swept the room and landed on a dissonant figure seated in a humble chair against the far wall. Elsa, the cleaning lady, the woman he had seen with a bucket and a mop in the company's hallways for 40 years. A cruel, low, dry laugh escaped his lips. "Elsa, what are you doing here? Come to clean up the scraps," he jeered, and a few directors chuckled nervously. "Don't worry. I'll make sure your Christmas bonus is paid on time." Elsa didn't reply. Her eyes, of a serene depth, met Marcus's for an instant, and in them there was no submission, only a calm that destabilized him for a millisecond. She simply stared at him, silent. The lawyer, Mr. Matthews, cleared his throat, adjusting the glasses on the bridge of his nose. The sound of the paper unfolding seemed like thunder in the quiet room. "I, George Sterling, being of sound mind and body and of my own free will, do hereby declare my last will and testament regarding the entirety of my estate." The reading began with the usual formalities: small bequests, donations to charities, the country house to a distant sister, the classic cars to a museum. Marcus drummed his fingers on the table, boredom etched on his face. He wanted the main event, the total control of the multi-billion-dollar business, and the position of CEO of the company, command of all operations and businesses, along with 49% of the shares I leave to my only son, Marcus. A collective sigh of relief and sycophancy rippled through the room. Marcus puffed out his chest, pride inflating his ego like a balloon. "Finally, the company is mine," he declared, slapping the table with his palm as if applauding himself. The power was palpable. The inheritance that would make him not just a multimillionaire, but a true billionaire, was in his hands. And the remaining 51%, Mr. Matthews, obviously mine as well, just a formality to consolidate controlling capital. The lawyer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not exactly, Mr. Sterling." He turned the page slowly, the sound of the paper a bad omen. Now, the final clause. The one my client insisted on calling the Master Control Clause. Marcus's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of confusion and irritation. "The what clause?" the lawyer continued, his voice firm and clear, each word landing like a hammer blow. "I leave the remaining 51% of the shares, the power of veto over all decisions made by Marcus, and the full and unrestricted ownership of this headquarters and all its assets." He paused dramatically, looking over his glasses at the figure in the corner of the room. Marcus's gaze followed the lawyer's, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Elsa was now slowly rising to her feet, her hands, once resting in her lap, now held firmly at her sides. Marcus's world began to spin, and his hands, once so steady, began to tremble uncontrollably on the polished table. The lawyer concluded, his voice sealing Marcus's fate. "To the only person who stood by my side and helped me build this empire from scratch, my secret partner and the great love of my life, who pretended to be my employee all these years to protect me from the greed of my own family, I leave everything to Elsa May." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Marcus's ragged breathing. Elsa walked with steady steps to the head of the table, took the document from the lawyer's trembling hand, and looked directly into the eyes of Marcus, who was pale, in complete and utter shock. "Thank you for keeping my seat warm, Marcus," she said, her voice calm but loaded with unquestionable authority. "Your first task as my employee will be to get me a cup of coffee, and after that, we'll discuss your salary. I'm thinking about a Christmas bonus." The silence that fell over the boardroom was so thick, it seemed to have weight and form. Each of the directors, men accustomed to moving millions of dollars with a simple nod, was frozen in place, their faces a mixture of disbelief and poorly concealed panic. Their world, a predictable universe governed by money and bloodlines, had just been turned upside down. All eyes darted between Marcus, whose face shifted from a ghostly white to the crimson of contained fury, and Elsa, who remained standing at the head of the table, a figure of unshakable serenity. For Marcus, her words echoed in his mind like a hammer on an anvil. "My employee." The humiliation was a bitter bile rising in his throat. He, Marcus Sterling, heir to a colossal fortune, the man whose slightest whim was law within these walls, was being ordered to serve coffee to a cleaning lady. The rage consuming him was so intense his ears were ringing. He saw the looks from his subordinates, saw the pity, the curiosity, and worse, the fear. They didn't fear for him. They feared for themselves, already recalculating their allegiances, reassessing the new map of power. The vast estate, the shares, the assets he had always considered his by birthright, were now under the control of the woman he barely noticed in the hallways. Elsa, for her part, showed no hint of triumph. Her expression was neutral, her shoulders relaxed. She wasn't acting like a usurper, but like someone finally taking the place that had always been hers. The coffee order wasn't an act of malice, but a test, a first, simple demonstration of the new reality. She had to establish her authority, and she had to do it now. The stability of the entire empire, of every business George had built, depended on how she handled these first crucial minutes. She watched Marcus, noting the vein pulsing in his temple, the tremor in his clenched fists. She had known him since he was a boy, a spoiled child who grew into an arrogant man. She knew exactly what kind of storm was brewing inside him. One of the directors, an older man named Arthur, a bit braver than the rest, tried to break the ice. "Ms. May," he began, his hesitation palpable. "This is unexpected. Perhaps we could discuss this more calmly." Elsa raised a hand, a simple gesture, but it silenced Arthur instantly. Her eyes never left Marcus. "And I'm still waiting for my coffee, Marcus." Her voice was low, but it cut through the tense air like a blade. It was the last straw. Marcus shot up from his chair, the expensive leather seat toppling backward with a dull thud. "You must be insane," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine, what my father built? This is my inheritance. I'll fight this in court. I'll drag your name through the mud. I'll prove you manipulated a senile old man." He pointed a shaking finger at her. "I'm not getting you coffee. I will not serve you, ever." The challenge was thrown down, explicit and brutal, in front of all the witnesses. The directors held their breath. This was the decisive moment. Marcus's refusal to obey such a simple order was an open declaration of war for control of the billion-dollar company. Elsa's reaction would define the future of everyone in that room. She didn't flinch. Instead, a trace of something that looked like sadness crossed her eyes. She turned slowly to Mr. Matthews, who was watching the scene with a grave expression. "Mr. Matthews, it seems my partner was more prescient than we imagined," she said, the calm in her voice disarming Marcus's fury. "Please read the addendum regarding Mr. Sterling's conduct in the workplace and the consequences of insubordination. I believe George foresaw this kind of reluctance." The lawyer nodded solemnly, pulling another sheet of paper from the envelope. A chill went down Marcus's spine. An addendum. What other trick had his father hidden in this cursed will? Marcus's threat hung in the air, thick with venom and desperation. His eyes blazed, promising a war of total annihilation. For a moment, Elsa's calm facade wavered, not from fear of him, but from a profound sadness. She saw in Marcus the dark reflection of George, the same iron will, but stripped of the wisdom and compassion that had balanced the man she loved. It was like looking at a distorted copy, a promise of greatness that had soured into pure greed. Mr. Matthews, sensing the situation had reached a point of no return, adjusted his glasses and held up the sheet of paper. His voice, once merely formal, took on a grave tone, the harbinger of a final blow. The addendum, titled Protocol of Continuity and Asset Preservation, was personally drafted by Mr. George Sterling 6 months ago, he began, and every word made Marcus take a mental step back. It stipulates that for Mr. Marcus Sterling to be entitled to receive the dividends from his 49% of shares, as well as his salary as CEO and access to any other funds and assets from the inheritance, he must comply with all professional directives established by the majority shareholder, Ms. Elsa May. The lawyer paused, looking directly at Marcus. Any act of insubordination, public defiance of her authority, or attempt to obstruct business operations, once verified by this firm, will result in an immediate freeze on all his financial assets tied to the company. His net worth would, in practice, become inaccessible. His cash flow would be cut off. He would be, for all intents and purposes, a CEO with no salary and a shareholder with no dividends until his conduct is reassessed and deemed cooperative. The air left Marcus's lungs in a hiss. It was checkmate, a gilded cage. His father had not only disinherited him from control, but had chained him to his own inheritance. The fury that had consumed him moments before gave way to a cold, calculating chill. He couldn't win by force. Not now. The humiliation was immense. But the prospect of losing access to the money, to the life he knew, was terrifying. He glanced at the directors, whose faces now wore a new expression, cautious respect for the woman they had ignored for decades. The cleaning lady was now the keeper of the vault. Elsa, seeing the message had been understood, resumed control with disarming simplicity. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing the directors for the first time, "thank you for your time. This meeting is adjourned. Please return to your duties. The first directive is to ensure stability. I don't want the stock market reacting to rumors. The company remains solid. Now, please, leave us." Like dismissed schoolboys, the men rose in a clumsy shuffle, grabbing their briefcases and filing out in silence, not daring to look at Marcus. The door closed, leaving only the three of them in the room. The silence was heavy, filled with Marcus's humiliation and Elsa's quiet authority. She did not repeat the order for coffee. Instead, she walked to the vast window, looking down at the city of Manhattan stretching below, a kingdom that was now hers. "George knew this would be a difficult moment for you," she said softly, her voice free of any mockery. "He didn't do this to punish you, Marcus. He did this to give you a chance." "A chance?" Marcus spat the word. "He humiliated me. He turned me into his pawn. He gave you a teacher, Elsa corrected, turning to face him. Now, if you'll excuse me, I would like a cup of coffee. The order was the same, but the context had changed. It was no longer a challenge. It was the new state of things. Defeated, Marcus walked toward the small coffee bar in the corner of the room, his movements stiff, robotic. His eyes burned with tears of rage he refused to shed. As the espresso machine hummed, his gaze fell upon a small picture frame that had always been there, but that he had never truly seen. The photo, old and slightly faded, showed his father, young, smiling alongside a young Elsa. They weren't in an office. They were in front of a small, modest food stall, their arms around each other's shoulders, an undeniable partnership in their eyes. Behind them, a hand-painted sign read, "Sterling's Pies, the start of an empire." And hanging from Elsa's neck, almost unnoticeable, was a key identical to one he'd seen his father keep in a secret safe, the contents of which no one had ever known. With hands that were meant to sign multi-million-dollar contracts, Marcus made the coffee. Every motion was torture, the water heating, the grounds being measured, the hum of the machine. It all seemed to mock his new station. He placed the small porcelain cup on a saucer and walked back to the table. Feeling the eyes of Elsa and the lawyer on his back, he set the coffee down in front of her with exaggerated care, a passive-aggressive act that did not go unnoticed. Elsa simply nodded her thanks, picking up the cup with a naturalness that infuriated him further. The photo, the image of that pie stall and the key around her neck burned in his mind. It was a piece of a puzzle he didn't even know existed. The narrative of his life, the story of his family's fortune, had always begun with the first office, the first major investment. That photo suggested a humble prologue, a beginning he had never heard of, and one in which Elsa was the protagonist alongside his father. Curiosity, an emotion he rarely indulged, began to override his anger. "That photo," he began, his voice hoarse, trying to sound indifferent. "On your desk. I've never noticed it before." Elsa took a sip of coffee, her eyes fixed on the city skyline. "Your father put it there the first day we set foot in this building. He said it was so we would never forget where we came from." "We," Marcus repeated, the word scratching his throat. "We," Elsa confirmed, finally turning to look at him. There was a universe of untold history in that gaze. Before Sterling Holdings, there was Sterling's Pies. Before the suits and the boardrooms, there was an apron and hot oil. Your father had the dream, and I had the seed money. A small nest egg from my grandmother. It was our first investment together. The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. Secret partner wasn't a figure of speech. She had been there from the very beginning. The empire he viewed as his birthright had been built on a foundation he was completely unaware of. A foundation made of pies and a cleaning lady's small inheritance. The humiliation gave way to a dizzying confusion. Who was his father? Who was this woman? He felt the ground of his reality crumbling beneath his feet. Elsa set the cup aside, and her posture shifted. The nostalgia gave way to a sharp, businesslike focus. "Mr. Matthews, you can leave us now, please. Thank you for your services." The lawyer nodded and departed, closing the door softly. Alone, the power dynamic was even more palpable. "Sit down, Marcus." It was not a request. He obeyed, taking one of the visitors' chairs, not his own, which was still lying on the floor. "The first thing we need to do is a complete review of all ongoing projects," she said, her voice firm. "I want detailed reports on cash flow, profitability projections, and risk assessment for every investment, especially the high capital ones. Start with the Orion project." Marcus's blood ran cold. The Orion project was his golden goose, a daring and extremely expensive luxury real estate development that promised astronomical returns. It was his signature project, his mark to prove he was an even more brilliant successor than his father. It was also a project whose numbers he had subtly inflated to ensure board approval. confident the eventual success would justify the means. "The Orion project is perfectly on track," he retorted, his voice defensive. "The reports are impeccable. I don't want the reports you showed the board," Elsa said calmly. "I want the raw numbers, the liabilities, the short-term debt, the interest on the borrowed capital. I want to see the real structure, not the facade. You have until the end of the day." She dismissed him with a gesture. Stunned and furious, Marcus stood and walked to the door. His mind was racing, trying to find a way out. This woman was no amateur. She knew exactly where to look. When he reached his old office, now cold and impersonal, he grabbed the phone, driven by desperation. He needed an ally. He called Arthur, the director who had tried to intervene. "Arthur, I need you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "She's out of control. She's asking for the Orion numbers. She's going to sink the company with this madness." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that felt like an eternity. "Marcus," Arthur said, his voice strained. "It's worse than you think. You didn't hear this from me, but the news is starting to leak. She didn't just ask for the reports. She just used the veto power your father gave her to suspend any and all funding for the Orion project, effective immediately." Arthur's news was like a secondary earthquake, more devastating than the first. Marcus felt the phone slip in his sweaty palm. Suspended. The Orion project. His masterpiece, the jewel in his crown, was paralyzed. It was a direct blow to his pride, his competence, his very identity as a businessman. He didn't need the reports, the numbers, the end of the day. Elsa had already acted. Her request hadn't been for an evaluation. It was a mere formality before she executed the sentence. He sank into his chair, rage giving way to an icy dread. This woman wasn't just taking control. She was dismantling his legacy before it had even begun. His office door opened without a knock, and Arthur entered, his face pale. "I couldn't say it over the phone," he said, closing the door behind him. "Marcus, the order came directly from the finance department, signed by her. Total freeze on funds. The contractors are already calling. The panic is going to start in a matter of hours." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, his mind racing. "She can't do this. It's suicide. The project is solid. The investors will panic. The stock will plummet. She's going to destroy the company's assets on a whim." Arthur hesitated, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Marcus, maybe she knows something we don't. Your father, these last few months, he was worried. He mentioned risk bubbles, over-leveraged investments. He was reviewing everything, especially Orion. Arthur's confession was a betrayal. His own father had been questioning his judgment. The narrative Marcus had built for himself, that of a misunderstood visionary, began to crumble. What if his father saw him not as a genius, but as a reckless gambler? And what if Elsa wasn't acting on a whim, but out of loyalty to George's principles? The thought was unbearable. He was old, Arthur. Too cautious, Marcus shot back. But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The market has changed. To make big profits, you have to take big risks. Maybe, Arthur said unconvinced, but the issue now is what to do. Half the board is terrified. The other half sees this as a loyalty test to her. No one will move against the majority shareholder, not after what happened in the boardroom. You're on your own, alone. The word echoed in the luxurious office, making it feel cold and empty. He had always been surrounded by people, by sycophants, by subordinates. But now, when true power was tested, he had no one. Meanwhile, in George's old office, now her command center, Elsa was not idle. She was on the phone, not with stockbrokers or bankers, but with a man named Tony, the construction foreman for the Orion project. "Tony, it's Elsa. Elsa May," she said, her voice calm and respectful. "I know the news about the freeze has reached you. I want you to listen to me. No worker will be laid off. Everyone's salary is guaranteed from my personal capital if necessary. Just stop the construction. I want you to get the material logbooks, the invoices from all the suppliers for the last 6 months. Compare them to the materials that were actually delivered to the site. I want to know if there are any discrepancies, anything, no matter how small. On the other end of the line, Tony, a man who had known Elsa for 20 years as the friendly cleaning lady, was silent for a moment, processing the order. He was an honest man, and for weeks, something had been bothering him. Shipments that seemed lighter than specified, lower-grade materials being delivered. He had reported it to his superiors, but was told not to make waves. "Ms. May," he began, his voice filled with a new understanding. "I think I might have something for you." Elsa felt a knot in her stomach. She had expected to find mismanagement, overblown optimism. But the hesitation in Tony's voice suggested something more, something George, in his failing health, might not have had the time or strength to uncover. She hung up the phone and looked again at the photo on her desk, at George's young, confident smile. "What didn't you see, my love?" she whispered to the image. "What was happening right under our roof?" Just then, her desk phone rang. It was the receptionist from the main floor. "Ms. May, there's a woman here who insists on speaking with you. She says it's urgent. Her name is Lucia Flores." The name hit Elsa like a lightning bolt from a clear blue sky. Lucia Flores was the chief architect of the Orion project, and as Elsa knew all too well, she was also Marcus's fiancée. The office door opened and Lucia Flores walked in. She wasn't what Elsa had expected. There was none of Marcus's arrogance in her posture, but rather a vibrant, focused energy, that of a professional at the top of her game, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit. She carried a project binder under her arm, like a soldier carries a rifle. Her intelligent brown eyes locked onto Elsa's, not with disdain, but with a questioning intensity. "Ms. May," Lucia said, her voice firm, wasting no time on pleasantries. "My name is Lucia Flores. I'm the chief architect of the Orion project. I need to understand why you have suspended funding for the most important development in this city, a project that represents the greatest future profitability for this company's business." Elsa gestured to the chair in front of her desk. "Please, have a seat, Ms. Flores." Lucia remained standing. "I'd rather not. I came here to defend my work and the work of 200 people who, right now, don't know if they'll have a job tomorrow." The passion in her voice was genuine. Elsa respected her for it. This woman wasn't just here for her fiancé. She was here for her creation, her legacy of concrete and glass. "I admire your dedication," Elsa said, her voice soft but unwavering. "But my first responsibility is to the financial health of the entire company, not just one project. And at the moment, the Orion project seems to be a risk I'm not willing to take with the capital George entrusted to me." "A risk?" Lucia laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "It's the safest investment in the portfolio. The first phase condos all sold out from the blueprints. The profit is guaranteed." While the architect spoke, Marcus, in his office, learned of her presence in the building. The news came from a terrified secretary. His initial fury gave way to a sharp panic. What was Lucia doing? He loved her, but she was impulsive, driven by an artistic integrity he considered naive. She didn't understand the nuances of power, the need to retreat to fight another day. She would confront Elsa and make everything worse. He reached for the phone to call her, to tell her to get out of there, but he hesitated. What if Elsa interpreted it as an attempt to silence Lucia? He was trapped, powerless, while the woman he loved dueled with the woman who had dethroned him. In the main office, the clash continued. Sales from blueprints mean nothing if construction costs spiral out of control or if the structure is compromised, Elsa argued, choosing her words carefully. I have concerns about the management of materials and suppliers. Lucia's expression shifted, indignation giving way to faint confusion. The suppliers? I approved every one of them myself. The quality is top of the line. Marcus did an incredible job renegotiating contracts to keep the budget under control. Renegotiating how? Elsa asked, her heart beating a little faster. There are things that worry me, Ms. Flores. Reports from the construction site. Lucia frowned, instinctively defending her fiancé. Marcus is an aggressive negotiator. That's why he's the best. He cut out the middlemen, found a new supplier for structural steel and cement, direct from the importer. He managed to reduce costs by almost 20%. It was a genius move to protect our cash flow and ensure bigger dividends for the shareholders. He saved the project from delays and going over budget. She said it with pride, as proof of Marcus's competence, but for Elsa, who had the foreman's words echoing in her mind. Shipments that seemed lighter, lower-grade materials. Lucia's confession wasn't a defense. It was the missing piece. What Lucia saw as business genius, Elsa now saw with terrifying clarity. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was deliberate fraud, endangering the company's reputation, its fortune, and worse, the safety of hundreds of future families. And the person responsible had a name, Marcus. Lucia's revelation hung in the air, dense and irrevocable. What she intended as a fervent defense of Marcus's business prowess to Elsa sounded like the click of a lock opening on a dark chamber. Marcus's genius move, the miraculous new supplier, the 20% cost reduction. It all snapped into place with Tony's worried whispers. This wasn't just a risk. It was a potential catastrophe, hidden under layers of doctored financial reports. The structural steel and cement were the very soul of a skyscraper. To compromise their quality wasn't cutting costs. It was planting the seed of a tragedy. Elsa's expression hardened, the softness in her eyes replaced by a steely resolve. "Ms. Flores," she said, her voice low and sharp, "thank you for your honesty. It has been immensely clarifying." Lucia, sensing the abrupt shift in the atmosphere, took a step back. "Clarifying how? I came here for answers, not to create more questions, and you've given me the most important answer," Elsa said, standing up. She walked around her desk, picked up the phone, and dialed an extension. "Security," she said, her voice firm. "Please escort Miss Lucia Flores from the building. As of this moment, her access is revoked until further notice." Lucia was dumbfounded, shock and indignation written across her face. "What? You can't do that. This project is my life." "The Orion project is under internal investigation," Elsa declared, each word weighing a ton. "Your presence here represents a conflict of interest. Please cooperate with security." Two uniformed security guards appeared at the door, their faces impassive. Lucia looked from Elsa to the men, the reality of her powerlessness hitting her. She gave Elsa a look of fury and disbelief before turning and walking out, her head held high. As soon as the door closed, Elsa moved with the speed of a general on a battlefield. Her next call was to Mr. Matthews. "Matthews, I need you. Now, bring the most ruthless independent auditors you know, and prepare an injunction. I want unrestricted and immediate access to all of Marcus Sterling's personal accounts and financial holdings. I want to trace every penny that has moved out of the Orion project for the last 6 months." Her third call was to Marcus. He answered on the first ring, his voice tense. "What did you do to Lucia?" "Your fiancée is fine," Elsa said coldly. "There, she just made the mistake of being honest. Marcus, I know about the supplier. I know about the fraud with the building materials. It's over." On the other end of the line, a dead silence. Elsa could almost hear the gears in Marcus's mind turning, calculating, searching for an escape route. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of all emotion, a terrifying monotone. "You don't know anything. and you've made a much bigger mistake. You've underestimated what I'm capable of doing to protect what's mine." And then he hung up. The click of the terminating line was the most threatening sound Elsa had ever heard. She looked out the window at the vastness of Manhattan, her heart tight with a sense of foreboding. The battle for control of the company had just turned into something far more dangerous. She was no longer just trying to save George's legacy. Now, she was fighting a cornered enemy with nothing left to lose, and as the afternoon faded, plunging the city into shadows, an urgent news alert broke across every financial news channel. The stock of Sterling Holdings, which had remained stable, began to fall. Not fall, plummet. A dizzying, inexplicable 30% drop in less than an hour, vaporizing billions in equity. The war had gone nuclear. Marcus had detonated the bomb. The red line on the computer screen was a bleeding gash, an open wound in the financial heart of Sterling Holdings. 30%, billions of dollars in market value, the entire fortune George and Elsa had spent a lifetime building, evaporating in minutes. Elsa's office, once a command center, was now a trench under heavy bombardment. The phones rang incessantly, directors, investors, journalists, all demanding an answer for the panic that had seized Wall Street. Marcus's maneuver was diabolical in its simplicity. He didn't need access to company funds to wreak havoc. He had something just as powerful: information. For years, he had cultivated relationships, whispered secrets into the right ears, built a network of influence in the financial market. Now he was using that network to spread poison. The rumor was subtle but lethal. The new management, an inexperienced former cleaning lady, was recklessly liquidating assets, paralyzing profitable projects and driving the company into the ground. It was a lie, but in a panicked market, fear traveled faster than truth. Elsa remained calm in the eye of the hurricane. She knew that screaming or panicking was exactly what Marcus expected. She had to think, to act, not just react. "Arthur," she called over the intercom, and the director entered her office seconds later, his face grey with worry. "Cancel all my meetings. I want you to arrange an emergency press conference for 1 hour from now and get me Mr. Matthews. Tell him it's a level 1 emergency." As Arthur hurried to carry out her orders, Elsa allowed herself a moment of weakness. She walked over to the photo of George, her fingers tracing the outline of his smiling face. The grief of his loss, which she had kept dammed up beneath the avalanche of events, rushed back with force. "Oh, George," she whispered. "You foresaw his greed, but I don't think even you foresaw this capacity for destruction. He's willing to burn his own kingdom to the ground just so I can't rule over the ashes." A flashback hit her. A night, years ago, sitting on the porch of the small house they kept secret on the outskirts of the city. George was worried. Marcus, then a young man fresh out of college, had made his first big move at the company, a risky investment that, by sheer luck, had turned a surprising profit. George wasn't proud, he was scared. "He doesn't love the business, Elsa," George had said, his voice heavy. "He loves the game, he loves the thrill of winning, and a man who only wants to win, at any cost, is a danger to everything he touches. He doesn't build, he gambles. And one day, he's going to bet the whole house." The memory steeled her resolve. She wasn't fighting Marcus for power. She was honoring the promise she made to George to protect the legacy, the company, the thousands of employees whose lives depended on that stability, to protect the house he had bet. Mr. Matthews arrived, briefcase in hand, his expression grave. "The auditors are on their way. The injunction is being prepared, but it will take time." "We don't have time," Elsa said. "Marcus is trying to force a panic sale to devalue the company so his allies can buy it for a fraction of its worth. We need to stop him now. The press conference is our first weapon." "What are you going to say?" the lawyer asked. "They'll want proof, numbers. We don't have anything concrete on the fraud yet." "I'm not going to give them numbers," Elsa replied, her eyes gleaming with a new intensity. I'm going to give them a story. The real story, the story of Sterling's pies. Meanwhile, in a luxury apartment across town, Marcus watched the stocks collapse with a cold smile. Beside him, Lucia, still shaken from her expulsion, looked at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. Marcus, this is insane. You're destroying your father's legacy. Our legacy, he corrected her, taking her hand. Sometimes you have to break a bone for it to heal properly. We're just clearing out the infection. Once the stock price hits bottom, our partners will buy a controlling interest, and I'll be reinstated, more powerful than ever. She will have been just a bad dream. His phone rang. It was one of his contacts in the market. She's called a press conference, the voice on the other end said. Marcus's smile widened. Excellent. Let the old woman try to explain herself. Let her hang herself with her own words in public. No one is going to believe some fairy tale. He hung up, confident in his victory. He didn't know that Elsa's story wasn't a fairy tale. It was the truth, and the truth sometimes is the most powerful weapon of all. The press room at Sterling Holdings was packed. Cameras from every major news network, financial reporters with grim faces, Wall Street analysts whispering conspiracy theories. The air crackled with the expectation of a slaughter. Everyone expected to see a confused, overwhelmed old woman try to justify the financial chaos. When Elsa walked to the podium alone, the room fell almost completely silent, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. She didn't look like a corporate tycoon. She wore a simple, dark-colored dress, her grey hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She carried no papers, no charts. She brought only her presence. She adjusted the microphone, and her calm eyes swept over the crowd, meeting every gaze, establishing a connection before she even spoke. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the speakers. "My name is Elsa May. For 40 years, you have known me, if you notice me at all, as the cleaning lady in this building. Today, I stand here as the majority shareholder of Sterling Holdings, and I understand your confusion and your fear." She paused, letting the honesty of her words settle. "The financial market hates uncertainty, and I am the biggest uncertainty you have faced in years. You look at me, and you don't see a CEO. You see a story that doesn't make sense." In his apartment, Marcus watched the live broadcast, a glass of whiskey in hand, a mocking smile on his lips. "Look at her," he said to Lucia. "Pathetic. She's admitting her own incompetence." But Lucia wasn't smiling. There was something in Elsa's posture, a quiet dignity that unsettled her. At the podium, Elsa continued, "Is the story of Sterling Holdings that you know is one of success, of major investments and billion-dollar profits. But that is only half the story. Today, I'm going to tell you the beginning." And then she told them. She told them about the pie stall, about the early mornings needing dough, about the smell of hot oil mixing with the smell of dreams. She told them about her grandmother's small nest egg, the seed money that wasn't made of stocks or Bitcoin, but of gold coins saved in a cookie tin. She painted a picture not of business strategies, but of partnership, of trust, and of hard work. "George Sterling wasn't a financial genius," she said, her voice catching with restrained emotion. "He was a man who knew how to make the best pie in New York City, and I was the woman who knew that if the world tasted that pie, they would come back for more. Our first cash flow wasn't recorded on the stock exchange. It was counted out in crumpled bills at the end of a long day at the market. The reporters, who had been ready to attack with questions about dividends and liabilities, were mesmerized. She wasn't speaking their language, but she was speaking a universal one, the language of authenticity. This company," Elsa raised her voice, "the Passion Building, was not founded on gold or on profit at any cost. It was founded on quality, on the promise that every pie would be as good as the last, and that principle, the principle of quality and integrity, is the true asset of Sterling Holdings. It's an asset that cannot be measured in dollars or euros. She then transitioned from the past to the present. The sharp drop in the stock today is not a reflection of our company's health. It is a reflection of fear. Fear planted by those who believe that quick profit is more important than a solid foundation. It was to protect that foundation that I temporarily suspended one of our largest projects, not on a whim, but because I received troubling evidence that the principle of quality was being compromised, putting not just our capital, but human lives at risk. The accusation was veiled but clear. She didn't mention Marcus's name, but everyone in the room and everyone watching knew who she was talking about. My first and only mission, Elsa concluded, looking directly into the main camera, is to honor the legacy of George Sterling. It is to ensure that this house, built on flower and courage, remains strong. I ask the investors, the employees, and the market not for your blind faith, but for a vote of confidence. Give me time to prove that integrity is still the best business. She finished speaking. For a moment, there was silence. And then, a reporter in the back, a veteran known for his cynicism, began to applaud. Slowly, hesitantly at first, and then, with more force, others joined in. The sound of applause filled the room. In the apartment, the whiskey glass slipped from Marcus's hand and shattered on the floor. The smile was gone from his face. He had underestimated her terribly. She hadn't hung herself with her own words. She had woven them into a lifeline and thrown it to the world to grab hold. Elsa's press conference didn't magically reverse the stock drop, but it did something perhaps more important. It stopped the bleeding. Panic gave way to curiosity. The story of the Pie Lady, as the news outlets nicknamed her, went viral. Financial analysts, once skeptical, began to debate whether Elsa's values-based management might, in the long run, be a more solid strategy than Marcus's aggression. The narrative had shifted. She was no longer the incompetent cleaning lady. She was the guardian of the company's soul. For Marcus, the result was a disaster. His allies in the market, who had expected a quick capitulation, grew hesitant. No one wanted to be seen publicly betting against the sentimental widow of a legendary founder, especially one with such a compelling story. His plan to force a hostile takeover was in tatters. Rage consumed him, a cold, impotent fury. He had fired his silver bullet, and not only had she survived, but she had emerged stronger. While Marcus stewed in isolation, Lucia found herself at a crossroads. Elsa's words about compromising quality and putting lives at risk haunted her. She was an architect. Safety was her sacred oath. The proud defense she had made of Marcus's genius in cutting costs now echoed in her ears with a sinister tone. She needed the truth. Ignoring Marcus's orders to stay put, Lucia used her old passwords to remotely access the project's servers. She didn't look for financial spreadsheets, but for something she understood better: the engineering reports and material certifications. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. The new steel supplier, Marcus's masterstroke, was a shell corporation registered in a tax haven. The materials quality certificates were crude forgeries, bearing the seals of European regulatory agencies that she knew, with a quick check, did not align with US standards. He hadn't just bought cheaper material, he had bought dangerous scrap metal and was using it to erect a skyscraper. Nausea hit her. Every calculation she had made, every blueprint she had drawn, was based on the premise that the steel would have a certain tensile strength, that the cement would have a certain load-bearing capacity. With these materials, the building wasn't just a bad investment, it was a potential death trap. The man she loved, the man she planned to marry, had knowingly put hundreds of lives at risk for money, for profit. The love she felt for him disintegrated, replaced by a cold horror. Meanwhile, Elsa, Mr. Matthews, and the team of auditors worked around the clock. They followed the money trail, a winding path of shell companies and international transfers. They discovered that Marcus wasn't just defrauding the company, but also himself. He had set up a scheme to divert a portion of the funds saved on the inferior materials into secret personal accounts. The fortune he was building for himself was vast, a shadow empire of cryptocurrency and anonymous funds. The betrayal was twofold. He had deceived his father while simultaneously stealing from his own company. In the middle of the night, Elsa's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Ms. May." The voice on the other end was Lucia's, choked with tears. "I need to see you. I have the proof. I have everything. What Marcus did it's monstrous." Elsa felt a weight in her heart. There was no triumph in being right, only a deep sadness for the corruption that had taken root so close to George. "Where are you, my dear?" Elsa asked, her voice as gentle as a mother's. "I'm scared, Elsa," Lucia sobbed. "He's lost his mind. He found out I was investigating. He's coming here. He said I'm not going to ruin his life." Before Elsa could answer, she heard the sound of a door being kicked in, followed by Lucia's terrified scream. The line went dead. The abrupt silence on the phone line was more deafening than any scream. Elsa was paralyzed for a second. The receiver pressed to her ear, her blood running cold. The sound of the door breaking down, Lucia's scream. This wasn't an angry outburst. This was the act of a cornered man, a predator with nothing left to lose. Without a second thought, she dialed Arthur. Her voice was calm, but with an undercurrent of steel that made the director sit bolt upright in his bed across town. "Arthur, I need the address for Lucia Flores, the architect, immediately. And call the police. Tell them it's a high-risk situation. No, don't say it's me. Tell them it's an anonymous tip. Hurry." As Arthur scrambled to act, Elsa grabbed her purse and car keys. Mr. Matthews, who had been in an adjacent room reviewing documents with the auditors, heard the urgency and appeared at the door, his face etched with concern. "What happened?" "Marcus has gone after Lucia," Elsa said, already moving toward the elevator. "He knows she's found everything. Matthews, get the evidence she emailed me, the forged certificates, everything. Give it to the police as soon as they arrive. I'm going over there." "You can't," the lawyer protested, following her. "It's far too dangerous." "Let the police handle this." "Lucia trusted me," Elsa replied, pressing the elevator button. "I'm not going to sit here and wait. That girl is my responsibility now." She wasn't an action hero. She was a woman in her late 60s, driven by a sense of duty that transcended fear. In Lucia's apartment, the scene was one of pure terror. Marcus, his eyes bloodshot with fury, had snatched the laptop from her hands and hurled it against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. "You!" he screamed, his face inches from hers. "You backstabbing fool! You were going to turn me in, me, after everything I've given you." Lucia, cowering in a corner of the room, was trembling uncontrollably, but her eyes still held a spark of defiance. "You lied to me, Marcus. You put lives at risk. You've become a monster." "I've become a winner," he roared, grabbing her by the arms. Something you would never understand. This world isn't for the weak and sentimental. It's for those who have the guts to do what it takes to get to the top. And you are not dragging me down with you." He shook her hard, his mind clouded by rage and panic. He had no plan. He just knew he had to silence her, retrieve whatever proof she had, and disappear. Maybe flee the country with the capital he'd siphoned off, the millions in Bitcoin that no one could trace. The thought of losing everything, the company, the wealth, the status, was more terrifying than any legal consequence. It was the annihilation of his very identity. Just then, the doorbell rang. A calm, insistent chime. Marcus froze, his hands still gripping Lucia's arms. Who could it be? The police. So soon. He dragged Lucia away from the door, a low growl in his throat. "Stay quiet," he hissed. The doorbell rang again. followed by a voice he would recognize anywhere, a voice that had become the soundtrack to his nightmares. "Marcus, it's me, Elsa. Open the door. Let's talk." The sound of her voice, calm and controlled, in this moment of absolute chaos, was so unexpected it threw him off balance. Elsa, here, how? Her audacity left him momentarily speechless. He looked at Lucia, then at the door. A dangerous, twisted smile began to form on his lips. The source of all his problems had come directly to him. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to solve everything, once and for all. "Get away from the door," Marcus ordered Lucia in a threatening whisper. He shoved her toward the bedroom and locked the door, ignoring her muffled protests. His brain, once clouded with fury, now operated with a cold, calculating clarity. Elsa's arrival was a fatal mistake on her part, an unexpected opportunity he could not afford to waste. He took a deep breath, composed his features, and walked to the front door, opening it just a crack. Elsa stood in the hallway, alone. Her presence was so incongruous with the violence that had just occurred that it seemed surreal. She showed no fear, only a deep weariness in her eyes. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice controlled. "I came to see how you are," Elsa replied softly. "And to ask you to leave Lucia alone. She's not to blame for your choices." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "My choices? You destroyed my life, stole my inheritance, and now you come here to lecture me. You have some nerve." "This was never about nerve, Marcus. It was about responsibility," Elsa said. "Your father entrusted the company to me because he knew you weren't responsible. He gave you a chance to learn. But you chose the path of destruction." He opened the door wider. "Come in. Since you came all this way, let's have this conversation." It was a dangerous invitation, an obvious trap. Elsa hesitated for a millisecond, but she knew retreating was not an option. Lucia was inside. She stepped in, and the door clicked shut behind her. The apartment was in disarray, the shattered laptop in the corner a testament to the violence that had taken place. "Where is Lucia?" Elsa asked, keeping her tone calm. "She's resting," Marcus lied, circling her like a shark. "Now it's just you and me, the cleaning lady and the heir. Let's settle the score. Tell me, what do you want from me? You want to see me beg? Want me to ask for forgiveness?" "I want you to understand," Elsa said, turning to face him, unintimidated by his proximity. "I want you to understand the weight of what you've done. You didn't just betray me or your father. You betrayed every employee who works hard, every family who bought one of your apartments believing in the promise of safety. You traded the honor of the sterling name for a handful of dirty money." Her words hit him, but not in the way she'd hoped. He felt no remorse. He felt rage that she dared to judge him. "Honor?" He spat the word. "Honor doesn't pay the bills. Honor doesn't get you to the top. My father was a sentimental old fool, and you poisoned him with these ideas. But I'm smarter. I built a fortune that even you can't touch. A fortune in cryptocurrency. Anonymous, untouchable. Even if you report me, I'll still be a multimillionaire. I won." It was then that Elsa made her move. She knew logic and morality wouldn't reach him. She had to hit him in the only place he had left, his ego. "You think you won?" she asked, a small, sad smile on her lips. "George always knew about your secret account. He started tracking it years ago." Marcus's face faltered. "You're lying." "He didn't tell you? What a shame," Elsa continued, her voice filled with a false sympathy. "He was so disappointed. He saw you were a thief, but not a very good one. He let you think you were clever, Marcus. He let you build up your treasure. But he did one thing. He hired the best hackers in the world. And 6 months ago, he transferred every Bitcoin, every last cent of your secret fortune, into a charitable trust in your mother's name." Marcus's world collapsed. Denial fought against the terrible plausibility of the story. His father was capable of that. The final humiliation, not just disinherited, but secretly plundered, treated like a foolish child. The floor gave way beneath him. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, he wouldn't." "He did," Elsa confirmed. "And the money is gone. The Orion project is gone. Control of the company is gone. You have nothing left, Marcus. It's over." It was at that moment, at the peak of his despair, that the police sirens became audible. Distant at first, but growing rapidly closer. Marcus looked at Elsa, the shock in his face twisting into a pure, primal hatred. He had nothing left to lose. With a cry of animalistic rage, he lunged at her. Marcus's scream echoed through the apartment, a sound of pure anguish and fury. He lunged not as a strategist, but as a blind force of nature, the last spasm of a collapsing personal empire. Elsa instinctively took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no strength to physically defend herself against him. For one terrifying second, she thought this was the end. But just as Marcus was about to reach her, the bedroom door he had locked burst open. Lucia, her face stained with tears, but her eyes blazing, was holding a heavy metal architecture award from her nightstand. With a cry that rivaled Marcus's, she rushed forward and swung it into the back of his knee. The blow wasn't strong enough to fell him, but the surprise and pain made him buckle and stumble. That single second of hesitation was all the police needed. The apartment door was breached by a tactical team that swarmed the room. In an instant, Marcus was surrounded, subdued, and handcuffed on the floor. The fight was over. He offered no more resistance. Lying on the expensive rug of his luxury apartment, his face pressed into the fibers, he didn't look like a defeated tycoon, but just a broken, empty man. The flashing lights from the cruisers outside illuminated the room, painting the scene in strokes of red and blue. Elsa rushed to Lucia's side. The younger woman was shaking, the metal statuette falling from her hands with a dull thud. Elsa pulled her into a hug, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "It's over, my dear," Elsa whispered. "It's all over now." In the days that followed, the truth came out. Not in market whispers, but in headlines and official reports. The evidence collected by Lucia and Elsa's auditors was irrefutable. The fraud scheme, the embezzlement, the deliberate endangerment of public safety, it was all exposed. The Sterling name, once synonymous with wealth and power, was now linked to one of the country's biggest corporate scandals. Marcus faced justice. Without his secret fortune to fund an expensive defense, and with no allies willing to be associated with him, his fate was sealed. He was convicted, not just for financial crimes, but for endangering lives, a charge that carried more weight than any other. Sterling Holdings, however, did not fall under Elsa's leadership. The company underwent a radical transformation. Her first act was to use the funds George had recovered from Marcus to demolish and rebuild, the right way, the compromised foundations of the Orion project, which was renamed the Legacy Tower. She opened the company's books, ushering in an era of unprecedented transparency. She established an ethics committee and placed employee representatives in decision-making roles. The story of Sterling's Pies became the new corporate philosophy: quality and integrity above quick profit. The stock, after a period of instability, began to recover, then to climb, eventually reaching heights that not even Marcus in his wildest dreams had envisioned. The market, in the end, rewarded honesty. Elsa didn't move into the CEO's office. She turned it into a memorial space for George, and keeping the photo of them at the pie stall prominently displayed. She chose to run the company from a smaller, more functional office. Lucia, after taking time off to recover from the trauma, was invited back by Elsa, not just as chief architect, but as the Director of Innovation and Safety, with veto power over any project that didn't meet the highest standards of quality. Together, the two women, bonded by a crisis that had nearly destroyed them, began to build a new future for the company, one based on a foundation much stronger than steel or concrete: trust. 5 years later, the morning sun over Manhattan illuminated the top of the Legacy Tower, a skyscraper that was not only the tallest, but also the most acclaimed and safest in the city. On its terrace, where a billionaire's private infinity pool would once have been, there was now a rooftop garden, a peaceful space open to all the building's residents. Elsa May stood there, her hair now completely white, looking out over the city at her feet. She wasn't wearing a CEO's power suit, but a comfortable dress and a cardigan. In her early 70s, she had found a kind of power that didn't come from owning shares or commanding boardrooms. It came from building, from nurturing. Lucia joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, just the way Elsa liked it. Their partnership had become the backbone of the new Sterling Holdings. Lucia was the visionary, the creative force designing the future, while Elsa was the moral compass, the guardian of the company's soul, ensuring that growth never disconnected from its roots. "The first residents of the social housing wing moved in today," Lucia said, smiling. "You should have seen the kids' faces." One of Elsa's first decisions as majority shareholder had been to allocate 20% of all units in new developments for affordable housing for the company's own employees and their families, from the cleaning staff to junior engineers. It was an investment in the community that made up the company, a direct return of profit to those who helped build it. The company's capital was no longer just financial, it was human. Elsa smiled, a genuine smile of contentment. "George would have loved this," she said softly. "He always said a home isn't made of bricks, but of the people who live inside it." They drank their coffee in a comfortable silence, a communication that needed no words. The company was thriving, its net worth had tripled, but more importantly, its reputation was impeccable. The Sterling name had been cleansed, redefined not by the amount of money it represented, but by the quality and fairness it now symbolized. Occasionally, Elsa would get news of Marcus. He had served his time and was living in obscurity somewhere upstate. The inheritance left to him, the 49% of the shares, was managed by a trust, providing him a comfortable income but with no power or influence whatsoever. He never tried to contact her again. That chapter was